Hey folks, I'm attorney Andrew Branca here from Law of Self-Defense. We recently announced one of our rare live online Law of Self-Defense advanced classes coming up soon. That class is filling up fast, and as usual, we're getting swamped with questions about what exactly the class covers. Rather than continuing to answer the same questions many dozens of times as each inquiry comes in, I've decided to put together this video describing the Law of Self-Defense advanced class so we have a place we can point people to for more information. In a nutshell, the Law of Self-Defense advanced class is for you if you'd like to gain a mastery of self-defense law in a single day. If that's of interest, make yourself comfortable and I'll explain how the advanced class works to make you hard to kill and hard to convict in order to help you make the decision to grab one of the few remaining seats for the upcoming live online class taught live by me and streamed live to your computer. It's also important to know that this upcoming advanced class is applicable to all 50 states, so no matter where you live, you're covered. I do want to emphasize that we only do these full-day advanced classes once or twice a year, so be aware that if you skip this opportunity, it will be until sometime in 2023 before the advanced class is offered again, and we don't even have a class scheduled yet in 2023. By the way, if at any time in this video you've decided you've learned enough, want to grab one of the rapidly diminishing number of seats for the class, you can do that by pointing your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. What I'll do here is step you through the amazing scope of content we'll cover in our Law of Self-Defense advanced class and the more than 100 very specific self-defense law questions we'll answer in that class. First, I'd like to share our advanced class mission statement with you, which is to provide the Law of Self-Defense community with an actionable understanding of self-defense law in order to enable better informed, more confident, more lawful decisions in defense of yourself, your family, and your property, so that you're well positioned to win both the physical fight and the legal fight. As we say here at Law of Self-Defense, be hard to kill, be hard to convict. Our advanced class is a full-day course of instruction made up of 8 distinct learning blocks, all of which collectively answer more than 100 self-defense law questions to which you probably don't currently have the correct answer. I'll step through those 8 learning blocks and the questions they answer in detail in just a moment, but first, a quick overview of those 8 learning blocks. Learning block 1, why and how the legal system prosecutes cases of self-defense. Block 2, the 5 elements of any self-defense claim. Block 3, defense of others and defense of property. Block 4, consciousness of guilt and self-defense immunity. Block 5, interacting with the police in the aftermath of a use of force event, and we spend nearly an entire hour on this interacting with the police module all by itself. Block 6, crafting a legally sound self-defense strategy customized for you. Block 7, was it worth it? Meaning, in the context of your use of defensive force, were the physical and legal risks worth the benefit? And Block 8, finally, an open Q&A session to address any questions or clarifications that have not been covered earlier in the course. It's because of our commitment to allow live Q&A that we necessarily have to tightly limit the number of students in the class, meaning there are very limited number of seats available. Now, if that quick overview of the advanced class has already convinced you to sign up for one of the few remaining seats, that's awesome. And again, you can do that by pointing your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. Remember, this is the last advanced class for this year, 2022. And when these seats are gone for this upcoming class, they're gone until the next class rolls around sometime in 2023. And we don't currently even have any 2023 advanced classes scheduled. Ask yourself, can you afford that kind of delay in knowing the actual law of self-defense, especially in an increasingly violent society? Do you know when you'll need this knowledge in defending yourself, your family, or your property? Knowing that if you step over the legal boundaries, even with the best of intentions, even by an inch, it could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal expenses and perhaps decades of your life in prison? You and I both know the answer to that question is that you cannot afford to take that chance, that you need to have the self-defense law knowledge already in your possession before that criminal attack happens. And remember, you don't get to choose the time, place, and manner of when you are attacked. The bad guy does. I expect he'd much prefer a target that is waiting for some distant future advanced class opportunity than he would a graduate of that law self-defense advanced class who knows how to defend lawfully and decisively in the moment of crisis. Remember, you want to be hard to kill and be hard to convict. So I urge you to not delay and sign up for our upcoming Law Self-Defense Advanced class right now. Grab one of the few remaining seats before they're all gone at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. That said, if you're still undecided, that's fine too, because I have a lot more detail on this class to share with you. So let's step through each of the learning blocks, the 8 learning blocks, and the very specific self-defense law questions they answer in more detail. Learning block 1, why and how the legal system prosecutes self-defense cases. In this learning block, we'll explain how the legal system handles and makes legal decisions about a claim of self-defense. If you don't understand that, you can't possibly understand what's likely to happen to you if you find yourself fed into that enormously costly and destructive criminal justice system. Nor can you understand how to make the smart, tactical, and legal decisions that minimize your legal liability to as close to zero as possible. In this learning block, we answer questions like, why am I, attorney Andrew Branca, uniquely qualified to teach you self-defense law? Why are good faith defenders so often charged with murder, manslaughter, and other serious felonies? Why is it that a defender either qualifies 100% for self-defense or 0%? Why is so much self-defense law information out there really just training people to get convicted? Why can't a good lawyer save a bad case of self-defense? Why are people who act in good faith self-defense nevertheless convicted and imprisoned? What does it mean to say that self-defense is an affirmative defense? Why is the fact that prosecutors love to win actually good for our self-defense case? Who has to prove or disprove what in a self-defense case to get an acquittal or a conviction? Next, in learning block 2, we'll move on to the 5 elements of self-defense law. If you're missing any of these required elements, you simply don't qualify for self-defense, period. So it's pretty important to know what these elements are and how to ensure that they are present in your claim of self-defense. In this learning block, we'll introduce you to the 5 elements of any self-defense claim: innocence, imminence, proportionality, avoidance, and reasonableness. We'll dive into each of those elements in detail, explaining how they work and where there's variance among the 50 states. Let's look at each of those elements in turn and the specific questions we'll answer with respect to each element. The first element is innocence. How does self-defense law define what qualifies as innocence? How do defenders, well-intentioned defenders, too often lose innocence and therefore lose self-defense? What is an initial aggressor? What is a provoker with intent, and how do they differ? What is mutual combat, and what is its impact on a claim of self-defense? How can a defender who has lost the element of innocence and therefore lost self-defense regain that innocence and regain self-defense? What happens if you start a non-deadly force fight, but the other person escalates to deadly force? The second element is imminence. How does the law define whether a threat is imminent? How do defenders too often lose the element of imminence and therefore lose self-defense? What is the AOJ triad? Why is it so valuable in identifying and explaining imminence, and what are its important limitations? How does imminence differ in the context of impact weapons versus a gun? How do obstacles and distance affect the element of imminence? What is the Tueller drill, and how is it widely misunderstood in the self-defense community? What is a defensive display of a firearm, and when is it more or less legally defensible? Can a verbal threat alone constitute an imminent threat that justifies self-defense? The third element is proportionality. How does the law define proportionality? How do defenders too often lose the element of proportionality and therefore lose self-defense? How does the law distinguish non-deadly versus deadly force in the context of proportionality? Why can a force not capable of causing death nevertheless qualify as deadly force? How does proportionality work differently in the context of non-deadly versus deadly force? What induces law-abiding defenders to use excessive, unlawful force and lose proportionality and therefore lose self-defense? What is the legal as well as tactical importance of having a well-diversified self-defense toolbox? The fourth element is avoidance. How does the law define avoidance? How do defenders too often lose the element of avoidance and therefore lose self-defense? Is stand your ground an alternative legal defense to self-defense? How does stand your ground actually work? Which states impose a legal duty to retreat and which do not? What's the difference between hard stand your ground and soft stand your grounds, and which states are which? What are the conditions often required in order to qualify for stand your ground privileges? What is the single universal exception to any otherwise existing legal duty to retreat? Why is the castle doctrine far more limited than most in the self-defense community think? And the fifth and final element of self-defense is reasonableness. How does the law define reasonableness? How do defenders too often lose reasonableness and therefore lose self-defense? What's required for your perceptions, your decisions, and your actions in self-defense to be deemed reasonable? What's the difference between subjective reasonableness and objective reasonableness? What's the effect on self-defense of lacking subjective reasonableness? And how is the jury told to evaluate your subjective reasonableness without being able to read your mind? What is the effect on self-defense of lacking objective reasonableness? To what extent is objective reasonableness customized for the circumstances of the fight, the capabilities or disabilities of the defender, the specialized training or knowledge of the defender, and the normal fear of being in a life-threatening fight? How does the defender prove that their specialized training or knowledge made their conduct in self-defense reasonable and therefore lawful? So that's the 5 elements of self-defense and the kinds of questions we answer in that learning block 2. Next, in learning block 3, we talk about defense of others and defense of property. Here we'll introduce you to the legal principles and practical realities of defending other people, your family, your friends, even strangers, in different contexts, such as one-on-one fights versus active shooter scenarios. We'll also cover the legal principles and practical realities of defending property, both personal property and highly defensible property, such as your home. In the context of defense of others, some of the specific questions we'll answer include: how does defense of others differ from defense of self? How do defenders too often lose the legal fight in a defense of others scenario? What is the alter ego doctrine of defense of others and what are its risks? How does a defense of others situation differ if you're defending your family versus defending a friend versus defending a stranger? What are the unique legal and physical dangers in defending strangers? How does defense of a single stranger differ from defense of many strangers against an active shooter? Is defending a stranger worth the legal risks? How do you make that informed decision? In the context of defense of property, here are some of the very specific questions we'll answer. How does defense of property differ from defense of persons? How do defenders too often lose in defense of property cases? When can deadly force be used in defense of property? How does defense of personal property differ from defense of highly defensible property? What qualifies as highly defensible property? Does your home, your business, your vehicle, your pets? How does defense of an occupied vehicle differ from defense of an unoccupied vehicle? What kind of special legal provisions are made for defense of highly defensible property that are not made for defense of personal property? What is a legal presumption of reasonableness, and what does it do for your legal defense? What are the typical conditions for qualifying for a legal presumption of reasonableness? What are the typical exclusions for qualifying for a legal presumption of reasonableness? Why is a forcible entry a common condition for a legal presumption of reasonableness? What's the legal difference between a genuine intruder and an accidental intruder? How do your self-defense options differ between a genuine intruder and an accidental intruder in your home? Then in Learning Block 4, we'll look at consciousness of guilt, evidence, and self-defense immunity. In this learning block, we'll introduce you to the legal doctrine of consciousness of guilt and the vital importance of not engaging in consciousness of guilt conduct that's unfortunately frequently advised in the self-defense community. We'll also cover the legal doctrine of self-defense immunity, how immunity works, how to qualify for immunity, and what its limitations are. Some of the questions we'll answer in the context of consciousness of guilt include: what is consciousness of guilt conduct and evidence? What is a consciousness of guilt jury instruction, and what are the consequences of that jury instruction for a claim of self-defense? How can consciousness of guilt conduct turn what would have been lawful self-defense into something that looks exactly like manslaughter? In the context of self-defense immunity, we'll answer: what is self-defense immunity? What are the legal benefits for the defender? Is self-defense immunity the same thing as stand your ground, or something different? Is self-defense immunity an alternative form of self-defense? What are the common conditions that have to be met to qualify for self-defense immunity? What are the common exclusions that lose you self-defense immunity? And how is self-defense immunity sought and obtained? Then we'll turn to Learning Block 5, interacting with the police in the aftermath of a use of force event. In this learning block, which is about an hour long, we'll take a deep dive into interacting with the police in the aftermath of the use of force event, including distinguishing between the distinct types of interaction to expect and learning when to assert your rights, what rights to assert, and how to assert those rights effectively. Some of the questions we'll answer in this learning block include: what are the advantages and disadvantages of the say nothing to the police approach? Can your silence ever be used against you in court? You'll be surprised by this one. What is the say little approach to interacting with the police? What are its advantages and disadvantages? What are the 3 distinct types of police interactions after a use of force event? And what should you do differently for each distinct type of police interaction? Should you request medical attention from first responders even if you think you're not hurt? At what point do you assert your rights? Which rights? And how do you assert them effectively? Should you demand to press charges against your attacker while you're at the scene? What can you say or do to minimize the chances of getting arrested? And at what point are you likely to be subject to interrogation? And what should you do at that point? Then we'll proceed to Learning Block 6, crafting a legally sound self-defense strategy. In this learning block, we bring together all the learning of the previous learning blocks and guide you in understanding how to craft a personalized, legally sound self-defense strategy for you that makes you both harder to kill and harder to convict. Here, we'll answer questions like: who chooses the time, place, and manner of attack? What pre-fight decisions are within the defender's control? If I modify my gun, can that be used against me in court? What is the tactical and legal difference between avoidance on the one hand and retreat or de-escalation on the other? What is the rule of the 3 stupids? Does being armed broaden or narrow when you ought to engage in confrontation? What are the specific tactical and legal benefits of retreat even in a stand your ground state? Do we tend to make better or worse decisions under stress, and why? What is cognitive conditioning, and how does it foster better tactical and legal decision making? What is legal dry firing, and how can it prepare us to make better use of force decisions under stress? What are the specific tactical and legal benefits of verbal self-defense? What is the danger zone of ambiguity, and what can we do to clarify ambiguous self-defense situations so we can make more decisive self-defense decisions? Then we'll move on to Learning Block 7, Was It Worth It? In this learning block, we take an introspective look at the balance between the imperative to protect ourselves and our families from criminal predation and the prospective value of defense of others and property, on the one hand, and the serious threats that any use of defensive force, however lawful, raises to our financial and personal freedom on the other hand. Each of us will need to determine for ourselves precisely where that balance falls. Here we simply attempt to help you make an informed decision for you. Specific questions we answer in this learning block include: what does it cost to fight a prosecution in the case of self-defense? What are the possible criminal consequences if you lose a self-defense case? When is it possible to reduce the risk of losing the legal fight as close to zero as possible? Does your lawyer really get to do jury selection? The answer will surprise you. Under what circumstances would a 20-year prison sentence be worth having pressed that trigger? Whose responsibility is it to defend strangers? How does defense of a single stranger differ from an active shooter scenario? What are the dangers of an active shooter scenario above and beyond those of more traditional self-defense? What risks and costs are you prepared to incur in order to protect personal property? When should you think through these vitally important issues? And will thinking through these issues allow for more decisive defense of yourself and your family? And does a more decisive defense within the legal boundaries foster your ability to win both the physical and the legal fight? And finally, we proceed to learning block 8, which is an open Q&A session. We do a brief Q&A session after each of the prior learning blocks specific to the content of each learning block, but in this final learning block 8, we set aside as much as a full hour for an open Q&A session in which we answer any remaining questions that have not already been addressed previously in the course to make sure every student learned what they came to learn. And that, folks, is that. It's truly an unbelievable amount of self-defense law expertise and education taught live by me, attorney Andrew Branca, straight from my brain to yours, streamed live to your computer, laptop, tablet, smartphone, in the convenience and safety of your home, with plenty of opportunity for Q&A and clarification, all in a single day. I can tell you that in this one-day law self-defense advanced course, you'll learn vastly more self-defense law than lawyers are typically taught in 3 years of law school. And you'll be receiving that expertise in plain English, not legalese, and from the nation's leading expert in self-defense law. Again, you can secure one of the few remaining seats to this class right now at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. Now, if you're wondering if there's a catch, there kind of is, and that is that seating is extremely limited for this popular course, and we only teach the class once or twice a year, and this is the last class for 2022. So when the seats for this upcoming class are gone, they're gone until sometime in 2023. Again, can you afford to delay knowing the actual law of self-defense, especially in an increasingly violent society? Can you know when you'll need that knowledge in defending yourself or your family or your property? Knowing that if you step over the legal boundaries, even with the best of intentions, even by just an inch, it could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal expenses and perhaps decades in prison? You and I both know the answer to that question is that you cannot afford to delay, that you need to already have this self-defense law knowledge in your possession before that criminal attack happens. So I urge you, please don't delay. Sign up for our upcoming Law Self-Defense Advanced class now at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. I look forward to seeing you in that class very soon so that you'll be best prepared to be both hard to kill and hard to convict. Until then, I remain attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.